Let's speak to the Labour MP, Ian Murray. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Gary.
This is possibly one of the biggest issues that Parliament has addressed. Is abstaining ever a principled position?
Well, it is in this case. I don't know which vote you're referring to, but if you're referring to the devolution vote that was taken yesterday, you have to understand the parliamentary process when an amendment comes from the House of Lords. Because it's called ping pong, the bill's already passed its common stages and indeed its Lords stages. So when a ping pong vote comes from the House of Lords, you either take the vote or you revert to the old clause that's in the bill. So although the devolution amendment that came from the House of Lords was only about, as far as the Labour Party was concerned, 75 or 80% of what we would have wanted, we didn't want to defeat that because it would have reverted back to the old clause that nobody wanted.
But ultimately, do you think your constituents send you to Parliament to abstain on these issues?
No, constituents send us to Parliament to do what's in the best interests of both our constituents and indeed the country. And if we had won the vote last night, it would have been a bizarre situation that we would have said to the government that we didn't want the compromise that had been put together. We wanted to go back to the old clause that everybody, including the Secretary of State and all political parties, thought was significantly deficient in terms of devolution.
In terms of the time that was allocated to this discussion on devolution, was it adequate?
No, it wasn't adequate. I mean, the government, again, it's about parliamentary process. The government are completely in charge of the timetable. And when it comes to legislation, they allocated 6 hours yesterday for the whole of the discussions around the EU withdrawal bill.
And they say that Labour caused a number of votes on similar subjects, which actually took up quite a lot of the time.
Well, actually, we called votes on all of the 15 amendments that came back from the House of Lords, which does take up time. But what the government could have done in their programme motion, which we all voted against, but they defeated us, was they could have said after the first 3 hours we'll have the votes, but that doesn't eat into the time for the second 3 hours. But what they did is put a programme motion in place to try and force the opposition parties not to vote. I'm not sure that's very democratic. That took up time because it takes time to vote, and therefore it was eating into the time to talk about not just Scottish devolution but also affected Wales and the big issues around the border in Northern Ireland.
Well, where does this leave the Scottish situation as far as you're concerned then? Do you agree with the SNP that what we're seeing here is a power grab ultimately, and this is in essence a failure of democracy, what we saw yesterday in Parliament?
Well, I don't know if it's a failure of democracy. It's certainly a failure of the government to bring forward an adequate programme motion that allows proper debate on a big subject. We now won't see that. Philippa Whitford said in a contribution at the start of this interview that we hope we'll get more time when it comes back. Well, I'm not sure it'll come back now because the government have accepted a House of Lords amendment, and therefore that goes straight into the bill. So we won't see the devolution amendments coming back. So we're going to have to find other mechanisms to debate this.
Well, what are they then? What are those other mechanisms then? If you knew that it wasn't coming back yesterday, shouldn't you and your colleagues have perhaps made more of an issue of this?
Well, we couldn't have made more of an issue of it because we only
the SNP did. The SNP made an issue of it at the end of the debate.
Well, actually, if you look at the whole debate last night, you'll see that there was points of order for over 45 minutes, including one from myself, from our Deputy Shadow Scottish Minister, Paul Sweeney. There was one from Vernon Coker, the Labour MP from Gedling. There was one from Martin Whitfield, the Labour MP from East Lothian. So you've chosen to choose Philippa Whitford in your piece, but you could have chosen any of our points of order that made that to the Speaker. We also spoke to the Speaker afterwards and asked what we can do. Now, there's nothing we can do on a legislative basis because the EU withdrawal bill, apart from some of the issues that will come back from the House of Lords, has now gone in terms of a devolution context. So we'll have to find other mechanisms. There's other bills coming forward, the trade bill, the customs bill, that we might be able to try and see if there's other ways of looking at it from a legislative perspective. But the blame for this lies squarely with the government, who've put together a programme motion to curtail debate.
So is Westminster failing Scotland in this instance?
No, the government's failing Scotland in this instance because the government...
But it's part of the procedures of Westminster that's failing Scotland as well. If you agree that Scotland was failed yesterday, then the procedures at Westminster had let Scotland down, haven't they?
No, the procedures haven't, and the Speaker said that quite clearly. The programme motion that's put forward that determines how long you can debate certain subjects, how they are grouped and how they're voted on, is in complete control of the Chief Whip and indeed the government. So the government could have come forward with a programme motion yesterday that gave us 20 days of debate on this particular clause, but they decided to give us 3 hours, which would have been eaten into by people voting on key Lords amendments before that. They could have not had the voting included in the time, which would have given us at least 3 hours, or they could have given us 20 days or 100 days to debate this. It's completely in control of the government. This isn't a failure of common standing orders or a failure of the system. It's a failure of the government to provide a proper programme motion for debate.
Will you be defying Jeremy Corbyn in the vote today on the EEA?
I'll be voting for the EEA single market, as I've always had that position. I think it's the least worst option when we leave the European Union. And I think for a whole host of reasons, many MPs of different colours, of different political parties, will be making decisions today so they can represent their constituents.
The party, your party, says that that will make the UK a rule taker, not a rule maker. They want to negotiate a separate deal. Why are they wrong on that?
Well, they're wrong on that because the European Union have already said that's not the problem. They're also wrong on that on the basis that the Labour Party will not be in power by the time the division bell rings this afternoon. So we have to deal with what's in front of us, and what's in front of us is what the Lords have given us for the EU withdrawal bill, and we have to take every single opportunity we can to make sure that these issues are kept on the table. This isn't about saying we should have the EEA single market. This is about saying that that particular issue should be kept on the negotiating table so that we can see whether or not the UK can get something that means that we have the least worst option and leave the EU. That seems like a perfectly sensible approach.
Labour's Ian Murray, thank you very much for that.